Well, we last left my grandfather stranded in Japan. But meanwhile, in the United States, it turns out that he actually fared far better than a number of the men here. Within 3 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the FBI began showing up at homes throughout the West Coast, and they ended up taking about 1,300 of the men into custody. They were taken without being charged, without due process, without being told when they might return home, or if they would return home. You see, if you were a clergyman, a Buddhist priest, if you were a teacher of, let's say, the martial arts, you were considered under high suspicion of being a spy because you were looked at by the FBI as being a community leader. In fact, one man told me that he had been out of state at the time the FBI began their roundup, and his boss had been taken. Knowing that his boss's wife had no one to turn to, he tried desperately to re-enter California to help her, but he ended up being stopped at the border because, since he was of Japanese ancestry, the state was now closed to him. Unable to reach her, this woman, who now found herself alone, frightened, and living amongst a nation now swept up with wartime hysteria, this woman committed suicide and left behind her a note that simply read, "God bless America." My family, of course, by now was living at the Tanforan Assembly Center. Tanforan was actually the local horse race track. Linoleum had been hastily tacked down in the horse stalls, and whole families now found themselves removed from their homes and living one family to a stall, with the smell of manure still permeating every corner. There they would stay for the next 6 months. By September of 1942, they boarded a train under armed guard to begin the journey to an undisclosed location in Utah. And there they would stay until the United States decided to let them go. As the train pulled slowly out of Tanforan to begin the trip, my grandmother said she looked out the window and she saw a woman her age with her baby out for a walk. She said that the woman looked up at the trains as they passed, as rail car after rail car passed by her, and she saw thousands of Japanese faces at the windows. The woman wore an expression as if wondering what was going on here. And for my grandmother, it was at that moment that she realized that that woman could be out there going for a walk with her baby, and she could not do that simple thing. She says that you never know how precious your freedom is until it's been taken away. Well, during that long journey, they were told to pull down the shades, but my grandmother said she snuck a peek out the window, saw the train pass the Berkeley station, and then it went through the Great Sierras, and then across the Great Salt Flats of Utah, and then came for a stop in the desert, and allowed everyone to get out and stretch their legs a bit. My grandmother recalls the armed guards standing all around them to prevent anyone from running away, and she always laughs because she says, as if there was anywhere to run to. Well, eventually they made it to Topaz, named after a mountain to the west of the camp. It was located in the Utah desert, and like so many other camps, about 12 in all run by the War Relocation Authority, they were primarily located in desert areas throughout the United States, wherever a local community couldn't raise too loud of a fuss. Topaz became their home until from 1942 until 1945. They lived in hastily built barracks of green wood that shrank in the desert sun and let in the dust during the sandstorms. But you know, not all of my family went to Topaz. My Uncle Tetz joined the U.S. military intelligence. You see, at the onset of the war, the United States found out that they really didn't know anything about Japan, had never been interested. Now, suddenly, they were at war with this country. Well, for those Japanese American men like my uncle, they were sent by the United States into the Pacific theater of the war, places like the Philippines and Saipan. They trained Japanese interpreters, interrogated Japanese prisoners to gather military intelligence, and it was these Japanese American men that broke the Japanese code that shortened the war with the United States. In addition, many of the men volunteered from the internment camps to serve in the army. They hoped that by doing so, the United States would realize that they were loyal citizens, that the United States was their nation too. Because of their race, they were segregated into the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. That group of young military men became the most highly decorated unit of that war for a unit their size and length of service, but they did so at a price. Their casualty rate was 300%. While Japanese Americans spent the war in internment camps, there were many of those who disagreed with what the government had done. And to these people, we owe our thanks. To the Quakers that fought long and hard so that Japanese American students in the camps might be allowed out to go to universities on the East Coast, of which my Uncle Mitch was a beneficiary. And to the governor of Colorado, who opened his state's borders so that Japanese Americans might come to Colorado to live and escape the internment. This man committed political suicide for what he did. And to the many Caucasian families who opened up attics and basements so that we could store our belongings, so that not everything would be lost. Their kindness, their letters, and their care packages will never be forgotten. These people served as lights during the darkest years of our lives. Well, my family finally made it back to Berkeley, California. And my grandfather, after serving the U.S. occupational forces in Japan, finally made it back to join his family. And in 1988, we came full circle when President Reagan, a great admirer of the valor of the 442nd, signed the Civil Liberties Act. That act provided an apology and a recognition for the violation of our civil rights. And although the United States could not reimburse Japanese Americans in 1988 dollars for the monetary losses they had suffered with the loss of homes and jobs and livelihoods, they did provide a monetary and symbolic payment to recognize the violation of civil rights. And it was my honor to be asked to join the Department of Justice to work in administering that program as their community liaison. You know, we were fortunate that we did not suffer the horror of the Nazi internment camps in Europe, or the labor camps of Cambodia, and the generations of slavery faced by African Americans. What we are, rather, is a modern-day example of how the civil rights of Americans can be summarily denied. This wartime violation didn't come during a war of muskets and cannons, of bows and arrows. This was a war fought with planes, tanks, and atomic bombs. This was a war many contemporary Americans still living can remember vividly because they were there. We cannot believe for an instant that such violations will never happen again, that we're past this. Our recent war with Iraq should have shown us this when American newspapers began to run articles discussing the possible removal of Iraqis in the U.S. Violations occur, and they will continue to occur. What matters is, does our belief in the values upheld by the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights still hold true no matter how frightened we are, no matter how terrible the enemy, no matter how strange the face? Racism draws its power from our fear. No one says it's wrong to be afraid. It's how a nation acts when it is afraid that determines what kind of salt it's made of. Will the United States, as the years progress, face its demons when they come and still maintain the faith? That answer lies in the actions of each of us as citizens, for we determine what our leadership may or may not do. And it is in us that the civil rights and the words of the Bill of Rights find their life, or die as words spoken but unrealized. Thank you for your time today, and God bless.